Yeah, everybody. So if you're just tuning in live or in the infinity that this will be on the internet, welcome to our latest episode of Behind the Couch from LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast hosted by me, Dr. Scott, and my amazing, brilliant, and possibly
Aw.
evil Dr. Shiloh. I'm not convinced she's not evil. But hey, so this is a full weekend for us because we did a watch party last night through Amazon, which is something that Dr. Shiloh figured out how to do a couple of years ago. And we wanted to do something that was like creepy, a little bit more creepy, as well as noir. And there's really nothing. Well, there's a handful of really good movies, but I'm telling you, Sunset Boulevard is really, really one of them. I mean, it is such great performances. It's such a novel idea, and it's kind of campy and melodramatic. And then at the end, the story takes like a twist that many people weren't prepared for.
We're
So
not prepared. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It was really, really fun. So thank you guys who made the time to spend your Friday night with us. And here we are on Saturday. Um, if anyone can guess what my shirt is from, if you were an 80s kid or you're the parent of an 80s kid, you probably know, but put it in the chat and no Googling. So all right. So we're going to get our guests on here in a second. We do have some new Patreon members to thank profusely. Man, in just a month, we have all sorts of folks joining us. So at the associate level, we have Lau M, Heather R, Pupson, Lindsay N, Zoe F, and Lauren C. And then at the intern level, Duncan. Duncan's been great. He's been very active in our Discord chats. And then at the doctorate level, we have Olivia P and Ashley A. So thank you guys so,
Yeah.
so much. It's like growing all the time. And I can tell you guys, it is so helpful. I mean, Scott and I have like equipment down and things like that, but we still pay an editor every single month. And to get to any festivals in 2024, this will certainly help us get to you guys. And who knows, like what else we can, put this towards as far as maybe doing something here in LA or meetups and things like that. So we just appreciate you guys so very much for supporting our show after 6 years. October was our 6th year. Wild.
Crazy.
I
Also, special shout out to Jason Usry of Ear Cult, who is our editor, and we should probably be paying him 3 times as much because he just does a really great job with our
Yes.
sound and takes out all the all that stuff that nobody wants to hear from your podcast host. But
Exactly.
listen, are we ready to bring in our
Let's
guests?
do it. Let's do
Great.
it. I'll take care of that.
So I'm going to go ahead and give a spiel to one of our guests today. We want to welcome the hosts of the Gold Shields podcast. First of all, we have Tom Smith, who began in NYPD, New York Police Department, in 1990 and worked a number of assignments over his career, including plainclothes anti-crime units before moving into an expertise role in narcotics investigations. And in the late 1990s, he started working now with his co-host Dan in the Bronx. He then moved into his career as a detective, working a variety of cases, eventually in conjunction with the terrorism task forces post 9/11. In 2020, he retired after 30 years as a second grade detective. I'm very happy to hear that that was in 2020. So we're almost 3 years past 2020, which means he's out of the
Right?
danger zone for retired cops. First
Yes.
3 years, which is always the wonky. So he made it.
Right. Right. Um, guys, feel free to turn your cameras on. Totally fine. We're just doing your intros, and I'm going to get to Dan Murphy right now, the other co-host. So he also has his own highly accomplished career over 40 years. He's a retired detective sergeant from NYPD as well, where he served for 20 years. Dan was a first responder to the terror attacks of both February of 1993 and September 11th, 2001 on the World Trade Center. And his accomplishments include 16 years as either detective or detective sergeant, serving in units such as narcotics division, the Organized Crime Investigation Division and Major Case Squad. Dan has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from John Jay and a master's in public safety administration from St. Mary's University of Minnesota, where he's a member of the adjunct faculty. And he's the co-author of the book Workplace Safety, Establishing an Effective Violence Prevention Program. Both are very accomplished law enforcement professionals. We're going to get into their careers more. So while we're waiting for that, I have to show you guys how these guys outdid us with their challenge coins. Scott, I have yours to drop off. This thing, one, is heavy as hell.
It's a weapon.
It's a weapon. It's not as big as the one from your bigger unit over there, which is still like the craziest challenge coin I've ever seen. But you guys, it has a microphone on there in the NYPD. It's so freaking cool. So really us, Gold Shields, and military murder, we're the only ones to have challenge coins that I know of. Yes, I can hear you now, Tom.
Oh, okay. All right. Hold on. No.
Woohoo.
All good.
Now you just have to tell Dan what you did.
I took my headphones off and just used the computer. For some reason, the headphones weren't
picking up. No worries. No worries at all.
As long as you hear me, okay.
Yeah,
sounds good.
We can hear you. We just want to get Dan Murphy on board. So we're all four here. How are you, Tom?
I'm great.
Good.
We're happy to be here. Round two.
I mean, it was just so quick. It was long time no see sort of thing.
Good turnaround.
Yeah, for sure. Well, while Dan is figuring it out, I'll just tell a little backstory of how we all even connected here, because you ended up having a guest on your show, Barry, who was the LAPD robbery homicide detective. And Scott and I know Barry because he was our consultant when we did an episode on sports violence and like the fandom, because he worked a big case out here in Los Angeles. And we ended up connecting with him, and he was so gracious to really give us the real deal and the backstory and bring the victim's perspective, that we don't get to hear, not firsthand, but he's someone that worked really closely with the family. So it was kind of a cool connection where I think I just started following you guys on Instagram.
Yeah, it was Barry and then Tanya.
Yeah, Tanya's amazing.
Tanya hit me up right away and was like, "Hey, you need to get in touch with them right now."
Oh, that's very sweet.
And yeah, I think we just started following each other kind of at the same time. And we got on the phone, which is always useful, and hooked everything up.
Yes, exactly. So when did you guys start your podcast? How long has it been now?
We actually came up with the idea in last December. And as simple as just mention on a phone call between the two of us. I just said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let me run it by you." And I said, "What about a podcast?" And he went, "Oh my God, that's a great idea. Never thought of it, and
that's opposite of what Scott said.
Opposite of ours. Yeah, that was opposite of our experience.
We actually just, and we were kind of happy at the way we did it. We took our time doing the research we wanted to do about what we wanted to do. We didn't just want to be the regular two guys on a podcast talking about whatever happened on any given night on the street.
Yeah.
We wanted to have kind of a purpose with it. So we took our time and listened to a bunch of other podcasts and other law enforcement podcasts and came up with the idea of really focusing and bringing attention to enormous, incredible work that cops, detectives, agents, the military, everyone does out there that no one knows about. When big cases happen, you hear and see on the news a very small part of actually what the detectives did. You hear more about the crime, the investigation, the story, but you don't know, the investigation came to a successful conclusion most of the time, but you don't know that that detective wasn't home for 2 weeks, didn't sleep for 2 days, didn't eat, so those are the stories we really wanted to bring attention to, so people understand what goes on into this job and the dedication and the focus that needs to be done, especially in a high profile case or in the military's version, their missions, what the
Sure.
mindset has to be doing this job.
Yeah, yeah. That's what drew me to your podcast was looking, when you look at television, what translates well there? Like, what do people enjoy? And I feel like no matter if you're law enforcement or non-law enforcement, the the shows that really go in depth in investigations, like the first 48, right, always kind of jumps out to me because it's done so well.
Mhm.
And they've always just picked such great detectives to follow. And you get the good, you get the mundane, you get the exciting stuff. And so for you guys to focus on really like investigators and detectives and hearing about the behind the scenes of the cases, I feel like it translated really well. I mean, are you finding that with your audience?
Yeah, very much. When we have the opportunity to get the feedback from people, either emails or when we go to events like CrimeCon and IACP that we were just at, we actually,
Mhm.
get to meet the people listening to the show. That's their first line to us, that it's part of the investigations they don't hear about. And the number one thing that we wanted to do was not have Dan and I sit in front of our computer and tell someone else's story.
Sure.
We didn't want to talk about someone else's case. So what we really wanted to do was get those people who did it themselves and they tell their own story, not a
Mhm.
third person, not us talking about it, get them to explain what they did, their emotions, their focus, the steps they took to get that job done, was another really important part of setting the show up.
Yeah, makes sense. How was your first crime con?
Oh, it was great.
What'd you
Oh my
think?
God, we had a blast. You go into it, we didn't know anything about it. We got told by a very, very tight group that we have and leaded by Megan Stockberger, who's the head of the Law Enforcement Hall of Fame.
Mm.
So she had told us, hey, you got to go down, you got to go to CrimeCon. So we set everything up really quick, got a booth, and the response was incredible.
So
When you
cool.
do this, you're not sure how it's going to go. You don't know
Right.
who's going to ever listen or who's going to know you. So it was a big thrill when you're down there and people actually knew us, and had listened to the show
Awesome.
and kind of sought us out while we were down there because we did promo that we were going to be there.
Mhm.
So the people that coming up to us, as cops and detectives, you kind of live your life that you don't want to know. You don't want anyone to know who you are.
Oh, it's such
Live
a
in the
hard
shadow. Yeah,
transition.
you're
Yeah.
kind of in the shadows, kind of no, it's okay. Look somewhere else, not at me. So
Yeah.
getting this notoriety is still a little different. A real funny story. We were out in IACP and a gentleman came up to the booth and told us that his son was a big fan of the show. And can I take a picture with you guys to send him? That was,
Isn't
when you
that the
get things
craziest
like,
thing? Yeah,
oh,
first time
it's,
that
you know what?
happens.
Yeah.
It's thrilling to hear, it's thrilling to have that part, that the show is impactful to somebody, and that makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, and for everyone, so IACP is the International Association of Chiefs of Police. It's a huge conference done every year in a different city in the United States, and it was just in San Diego. And we tried to bribe them to come up to LA, and they tried to bribe us to come down to San Diego.
Yeah, we did.
They bribed us with drinks, Scott. But it
Works
was,
for me.
I know, too short notice. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm well. Can you hear me now?
We
Yes.
can hear you.
My
So
apologies for my
deep
technical issues.
breaths.
Yeah, I'm not in my usual broadcast location. I'm actually up here pursuing a story for the show. I'm in Maine.
Oh, well, I can gather what that might be. So we look forward to it.
Not a big mystery. Usually I like to leave the audience guessing, but this time I'll tell them.
On assignment, I guess. So we skipped ahead a little bit into our questions, but we do want to hear from each of you how you came to be in law enforcement. And then, of course, a little bit more in depth into an overview into your careers than what we just did. So, Dan, since you're joining us right now, why don't you start?
Sure. Grew up in mostly in Queens, 38th Street and Greenpoint Avenue in Long Island City section of Queens, and really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And by the time I was 18 years old, I was going to Queens College, taking communications classes, and not really sure exactly what that would look like. And one day when I was about 20, my uncle, who had been with the NYPD for a long time, he ended up doing almost 39 years, said to me at a family barbecue, he said, you should take the police test that's coming up in a couple of months. And I thought about it. I was like, really? I really didn't know if it was what I wanted to do. I had no concept. I knew I didn't want to sit in an office, and I knew I didn't want to swing a hammer in all weather. And that seemed to be two of the options in my neighborhood: construction work, or, try to get an accounting degree and sit in an office and look at other people's money. So I had no very limited idea what I wanted to do. I took the police test. I did very well. I was hired in the first group that was hired out of the test. Now, this test in 1982, 52,000 people took the test in New York.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Right now, they can't get 5,000 people to take it, and they don't even charge a fee anymore for the filing. It's ridiculous, but it was a big group and very competitive to get in. I was lucky. I was hired in February of 1984. Dating myself, and I just fell into it and really loved it. I loved the excitement. I loved the realness of it, the people, all that kind of stuff. It was just great. And hang on one second.
Yeah, no worries. I know that area of Long Island City. Our friend lives out there, and I visited 3 years ago was the last time I was out there. Great place. I don't know what it was like in 1984 or 1982 or your whole life, but it's a great place.
Well, it was, I started out working in Brooklyn, in Bushwick and Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. And at the time, it was still very, very much a high crime, heroin infested area. There was just a lot of stuff going on. And it was only a few minutes away from where I lived, which was more working class. But it was tough streets back then. And it was old school stuff. It was really, compared to today, very simple technologies being used by cops, very simple old school techniques and tactics. And that's what I was trained on.
Very, very good. I mean, the center of the world, and in our intro of you, certainly you guys have both seen a lot and done a lot. I mean, it seems like it's a department where you can work a ton of different assignments if you want, just kind of, what am I sick of? What do I want to do now? Where do I want to go? Sort of thing. Is it pretty easy to move around and kind of meet those goals you're looking at?
It depends upon what you want. Certain assignments are not as easy to get. If you want to become a detective, you have to go into an investigative track, which is not just automatic. You have to have a good amount of arrest activity. You have to have kept your nose clean. You have to have proven yourself to be a consistent worker. And then you can get assigned to something like narcotics or the public morals division, vice enforcement it's called now, auto crime, things like that. That'll work your way towards a detective shield. And then you work your way, you maneuver your way from there. Or there's two routes really. You're going to go detective route for the most part, or you're going to go study, become a sergeant, lieutenant, captain, promotion, and work your way up the ranks. I really didn't have much of an interest in working my way up the ranks. I really liked the work, getting my hands dirty, investigating cases, interviewing people, checking out leads, following evidence. To me, that was what the job was all about, and that's why. But yeah, there is unique opportunities. A lot of opportunities like this exist in other big departments, but the NYPD has, by and large, the single most expansive set of specialized units in the country. That's right.
I bet. Tom, what brought you to law enforcement?
Well, I grew up in a law enforcement house. My dad, who was my hero, was a NYPD detective for 26 years through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the real tough times of New York City. And that's all I ever wanted to do. I've said all growing up that I was doing one of two things. I was either going to play baseball or be a cop. And that was it. And, I would steal my dad's shield when he got home from work and put it on my belt to run around and arrest my sisters and all that. So it was all I ever wanted. And had the opportunity, took the test in 1987. But by that time, there was a lot of hiring freezes going on. And it was funny, like Dan said, and I got the reaction from you of him taking a test of 50,000 people took it. When I took my test, 88,000 people took the test in
Oh my gosh.
1987. Yeah, because that was, you know, in and around New York, that was the job.
Yeah.
That was where you wanted to be. If you had any inkling to go into law enforcement, you wanted to go in the NYPD. And
Yeah.
I finally got hired. Our class finally went in 1990. And then, you know, did the 6 months in the academy and graduated and went to the west side of Harlem in the 30 precinct. Now, at the time in 1990, 91, 92, the city was completely out of control. We had anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 homicides. We had 110,000 robberies, you know, 88,000 rapes. It was just a wild, wild place to work. And we were in the middle of it, you know, and both Dan and I in 1994, when the administrations changed in the city, and got a new police commissioner, Bill Bratton, and Louis Anamone came in, and John Timoney and Jack Maples completely turned the NYPD around in one stroke of a pen. You know, they just said, hey, cops are going to start being cops again.
Yeah.
And we're going to clean the city up. So Dan and I were right in the middle of that with that initiative to change the city around. And like today, you know, we've had conversations like this. One of the biggest parts of us changing the city around was getting the district attorneys on board. You know, unlike today, the DAs were all on board with this was the way we were going to clean the city up and change it, was to lock people up and keep them in jail. So like, you know, Dan said too, there's no better place in the world. Everything I wanted out of the job, I got.
Great.
You know, everything I wanted to do, I got to do, and had a very fortunate career, doing a lot of things that you never thought you'd be able to do, that we both got the opportunity to do, and had a great ride.
So was detective route a pretty clear path for you as well?
That was it.
Yeah.
I had no interest in taking any tests. Being a sergeant, I used to get yelled at about why I'm not doing that, you know, but the detective shield was, you know, gold shields was exactly what I wanted. And the day I got it was a really proud day that, you know, my dad was there, my mom was there, you know, so that was a big, big step.
Yeah.
So how did you both know that that was going to be the branch? I mean, I understand going a direction because you don't want to go the other direction, but that's going away from something. What was it that was pulling you towards the detective, and when did you figure that out? Were you still on a beat when you started figuring that out?
Well, I think for Tom, if I can answer for him, you know, his dad's influence was intense. He was surrounded by his dad's friends, detectives. It's a lifestyle, and it's different than being a patrol cop in many ways. For me, I really didn't start out thinking I would ever even want, or all I thought was, you know, this is really cool. I like working in uniform in a busy place, making some great friends, making good arrests. To me, that was fun. And then I started seeing detectives at various crime scenes and other things, and I watched the way they worked, and I saw the way they interviewed people, and I saw the way they were viewed on the street.
Okay.
And it was like, that's a whole different world. And those guys and girls look like they really know what they're doing. So that's important stuff. So I really wanted to figure out that piece of it. Yes.
So then kind of expanding on that, in our previous conversations for your show, we talked about self-care and some of the challenges. I guess I wanted to steer back to that conversation as well. And, you know, with your expert experience in history, can you tell us about sort of the specific concerns regarding taking care of yourself as a detective, as opposed to taking care of yourself as a beat cop?
Well, when you're doing a case as a detective, you are engrossed in that case. That's it. That's all you're focused on. So you have to manage, and I didn't do this particularly well. You know, you have to know when to sleep. You have to know when to eat. You have to know when to take a break, which I always had a hard time doing and would get yelled at by my partners and Dan every once in a while. You know, that you have to manage your head and your mind to be clear with decisions that have to be made, you know, especially when you're trying to figure something out. You know, you have to have the rest, you have to eat, you know, so that was always something you had to pay attention to. But sometimes you get so into it and you're, maybe not in a city, you're in a different city helping, chasing someone around, and that's your goal. And the other things that you should pay attention to sometimes get away from you. But it was, it was hard to do, but it got managed. And, when it was all done, having, talking about things, making sure you didn't keep it inside you, tell the stories and tell the funny stories and tell the even interesting or dangerous stories to get it out. Keeping it too much inside you was always a problem, because at some point it's just all going to come out. So if you just, as you progress through your career, talk about it, it was much easier.
And just to piggyback on what Tom was saying, when you worked in uniform, when I first went on the police department, uniform assignments were this really weird rotating 9-squad chart, it was called. So you never knew what shift you were working. You're always tired. That was a really tough way to take care of yourself, working a week of days, a week of nights, a week of midnights, back to days. You don't know when to sleep. Your body's a mess. And I was young and it was tough then. But then when you go to detective capacity, it depends upon the unit you're in, but for the most part, you might have better hours, but it depends. In a place like the major case squad or even a narcotics division, you go to work in the morning thinking you're going to be home that night. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. No.
Yeah.
No, we're going to go make 40 arrests. We're going to knock down 5 doors. We're going to do this. We're going to do a case by, you're working 24 hours. And when I was in the major case squad working kidnappings, and we were doing 55 to 60 a year, kidnappings for ransom, you're working basically until the victim gets freed, if it's your case. And that can be 2 days, 3 days, crash for a few hours, you're back on the case. You have a live victim someplace and it's your responsibility. Now, the whole team works on it. It's a big team effort, but you are basically engrossed in that case and you don't have any personal life until that case is done. Right. And that can be tough. And sometimes these kidnappings go on for a week, 2 weeks, sometimes more, but those are very, very stressful. They take their toll on you. You're not seeing your family. You're not sleeping like you should. You're not eating like you should. It's very difficult. And then when you finally free the victim, now you have to deal with the victim who's a mess.
Right. You
have to take them to the hospital. You have to interview them. You have to deal with them and guide them through the system. You usually have to find a hotel for them to stay in because they're being chased by a gang. All this crazy stuff. It's very engrossing and very all-encompassing. And so, if you've got a good home life and you've got a good support system, then that can help you a lot. But even so, it's a young girl's game. I could never do that stuff now. Those hours were way too much. The pressures were way too much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, patrol can be so wacky with the unknown schedules and the sleep is just, we know sleep is just connected to everything in regards to wellness. But at least when you're done for the day, right? Like there's just give and take to both of those. And that's what I like when you speak to your guest on your podcast is you do talk about, the good, the bad, and the ugly about what it has done to you. And especially, Tom, you mentioned Tanya Owen's story, and it's just the most unbelievable story. I encourage everyone who's watching this to go check out that episode to see what it's like to be, 1, a female officer, 2, to be in a relationship with another officer on the job, and then to lose that person on the job due to, a bad guy taking his life and the aftermath of that. And gosh, just some very powerful stuff. And I'm glad it's not the glorification of just what, like, hey, this is what we're doing, solving cases. It's the real nitty gritty. So, the law enforcement podcast genre is almost as saturated as the true crime genre. And it's just, I love that you guys have found a way to carve out your own space with people who are telling their stories. So, with that, today we wanted each of you to talk about a couple of cases, a case for each of you that were really impactful in your careers. And Dan, why don't we start with you? We've had quite a few episodes with helping educate our audience. in matters of threat assessment. So I'm glad you actually were both willing to talk about cases sort of in that realm. But Dan, we'd love to know about the stalking threat assessment case that we had previously talked about and how that influences your work even in retirement.
Yeah. So this is a post NYPD. This is a corporate security, chief security officer role case that we're going to discuss right now. This happened when I was working for a large, I'll call it a multinational corporation, as the head of security, and I had already gone to schools for threat assessment, learned more about it, because I realized in my role in corporate security, it was a whole lot less police and a whole lot more long-term ownership of a problem. Someone's in your organization and they represent a problem, or they pose a threat, or they appear to be threatening or disturbing. I call it threatening or disturbing. Then you own that situation. And even when you get rid of that person, if that's the ultimate that you do, you own whether or not they come back, you own whether or not they continue to get in touch with people. That's your problem for a long time. Unlike a cop who shows up, takes a report and says, okay, if he comes back, call us. So I went to school, learned a lot, worked with Randy Ferris, my co-author of my book. He taught me quite a bit. The Gavin DeBecker team were fantastic. And I thought I had seen everything at this point in my career. I really thought I had seen, between my police career and corporate security and all this other stuff, I figured I have just about dealt with every type of human being I can deal with. And then I met somebody that was new. Now, this doesn't happen every day.
No.
We're looking about 25 or 28 years into a career of dealing with crazy people and nuts and all kinds of stuff, not to simplify the term, but you know what I mean. People who do the weirdest things, the craziest things. This guy surprised me. I was in work as a head of security, and I get a call one day. Yeah, we have a little situation with an employee. Let me pull the story back that led up to that call. There was a team in this company, an IT team of about 12 or 13 people who were a project-specific team. They had worked together for probably 13 or 14 years, with maybe one or two people moving from that team the whole time. They were a solid core group who knew each other very well. They knew each other's families. They went to happy hours and lunches together. They were a fairly tight group. One of the members of this group was a woman who was married with 4 children and lived about 5 or 10 minutes away from the office. And she lived a normal life, went to the happy hours, did all that kind of stuff. And another member of this group was a gentleman who we'll call Dave. And Dave was in his early 40s, and Dave was I don't know which side of the brain dominates, IT kind of stuff, and which side is more personality and social driven, but he was heavier on the IT side. He was a little socially awkward.
I know those folks.
Very quiet.
I know those folks.
I'm not putting him down. He was very smart, but he just was a little socially awkward. He would go out to the events. They'd go out for drinks or lunch, and he'd be sitting there and he's doing his thing, and he just wouldn't really talk unless somebody asked him a question. Hey, Dave, you want some, another beer or something? Okay. I mean, really, and everybody just got used to it. That's just Dave.
Sure.
He was never a problem with anybody. As far as anybody knew, Dave didn't have a wife, didn't have children, didn't have a family, didn't have a significant other, just kind of was a bit of a loner, but he wasn't a problem. Well, there comes a point in time when this gentleman, Dave, comes into work one day, and he finds out that what happened the day before out at the ladies, and we'll call her Mary, at her house, is it was Christmas morning at Mary's house, and her husband, who had been experiencing severe depression and mental health issues, took his life in front of the family, in front of the Christmas tree, while the kids were opening presents. To say devastating there's no word for it, how horrible. Mary is absolutely knocked out of her socks, in shock and disbelief and depression and trauma. Her kids are. It's a really, really rough time. He comes to work, he finds out about it. He says, oh, it's terrible. The whole team goes to the funeral. After the funeral, Mary's mom has a little sort of reception, as people will do after funerals, back at her mom's house. And kids are outside running around, and Dave is outside watching the kids play, and he's just sort of being a fly on the wall. And inside, everybody's talking, and people start leaving. The natural ebb and flow is you stay an hour or two to be social, and you go. And then Mary's best friend, also a member of the team, looks outside and sees Dave there. And Mary's like, Dave's still here. And she says, I'll go take care of him. She goes out to talk to Dave. You know, Dave, people are kind of leaving. It's probably time to let Mary be, you know. He says, oh, okay. And he turns and he looks at her and says, do you think she likes me?
Oof.
Perhaps the most bizarre, shocking question you could ask at a moment like that. Do you think she likes me? And the friend said, what? Yeah, do you think she likes me? And the friend was so shocked, she just, her jaw hung down. She went back inside and said, Mary, yeah, but Dave has to go. I'll get him out of here. So Dave leaves. And now what starts is a 2-year campaign of Dave deciding that he wants to be around Mary. So everywhere Mary goes, Dave is nearby, during work and after work. Mary will be online waiting to get a pizza on a Friday after work, and Dave will be 3 people back, and she'll turn around and he'll just wave. Now, he lives about a half an hour the other direction. Saturday morning, she would be at her kids' judo or basketball or dance or whatever events. She had 4 kids, what they were in, and he would just show up. He'd be in the stands. He had no kids.
Oh my
He'd live anywhere near
gosh.
there.
He just thought he could plug and play and be the new husband, huh?
Right. And
Wow.
other people in the team would notice Dave sitting on the other end of the cubicle, right outside her cubicle, and it wasn't his cubicle. He's just sitting there listening, overhearing everything. Occasionally, he was caught in her cubicle, looking at things, looking at her date book to see what she had in her personal life. This goes on for about 2 years. And one day they decide that they are going to reconfigure the work location and move everybody's cubicles around into this new configuration. So they sent around kind of a dream sheet. Who do you want to sit next to? And by the time Mary got hers, Mary did hers, sent it around, and then Dave put himself right next to Mary. And then Mary's friend ran into Mary and said, hey, we have to stop this. He wants to sit right next to you. I know what he's been doing. So Mary,
I'm sorry, he's been doing this for 2 years,
2 years.
And what year is this?
Oh, this is I want to say the 2007 to 2010 range.
Okay.
Something like that.
Gosh, this poor woman.
Yeah.
So Mary finally had it. She goes in to see the boss to say, I can't have him sitting right next to me. And the manager says, why not? And she says, well, he's been kind of hanging around me and doing all this stuff, and he's making me feel uncomfortable, and I'm trying to deal with the loss of my husband, and this guy's around every time I turn around. The manager, in typical management failure 101, says, I'll take care of this. Dave, get in here. Dave, leave Mary alone, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lovely.
Yeah. Obviously no understanding of what Dave, had going on in his head and heart. So he figured he'd handled it. Mary said, okay, whatever. Well, 2 more years. 2 more years of the same behaviors that goes on. Every time she turns around, Dave is there. Now, Dave has not asked her out. Dave has not expressed any romantic interest. He's just around. It's a Sunday night in the wintertime. She's at home with the 4 kids. 2 are fighting 2. They team up. They fight each other. She decides, enough. I'm going to break this up. I'm going to put 2 of you in the car with me. We're going to go out and we're going to get gas and milk for the week. The other 2 of you sit here. She goes in the garage, opens it up, turns the car on, backs out of her driveway. And who's at the end of the driveway in his car with the lights off? But Dave. This is Sunday evening at about 8 o'clock. It's dark out. Now she's had it. Mary's had it. She jumps on the phone, calls 911, takes off after him. He takes off, turns the lights on and keeps going. Local police eventually pick up on it, pull him over, identify him. They ask her, do you want him arrested or do you want him cited? And she says, no, I just want to confirm it was him. I'll report it at work tomorrow. Okay. That's when I got the call the next morning. The HR folks called and said, we have a situation of stalking and whatever, and we want you to handle it. I said, okay. So I went in, I did my interviews. I interviewed Mary. I interviewed 1 or 2 of her coworkers. They all told me the story about what Dave was doing. I said, all right, here we go. Now it's time to interview Dave. When I say that I have interviewed some incredibly bizarre individuals in my life, this was the single most bizarre individual I had ever spoken to, and here's why. I sat across the table from him, introduced myself, and began a discussion. Dave, I need to talk to you about what's going on here. I need to find out, your side of the story and all this kind of stuff. Dave, why were you in her driveway last night? Oh, I wasn't in her driveway. No, Dave, she saw you in the driveway last night. Nope. Dave, you own a Honda, right? Yeah, you were in a Honda in her driveway last night. No. Dave, you own a blue Honda with this state plate in her driveway at 8 o'clock last night, right? No. I had to go through every single point on a long list before he would admit to it. You were at this address at this time with this car facing this direction. As I started figuring out what he needed to hear, I would fill in every blank. And once I filled in every blank, he gave me an answer. But not until then.
Wow.
It took hours. It was like
I'm
pulling
sure.
teeth.
Wow.
And what kind of work did he do?
He was an IT, some form of an engineer in IT
Okay.
with the company.
Okay.
But to
So
think
I'm
like
doing-
this has fallen in your lap 4 years after it has just escalated.
Yeah.
And
Right.
now you're trying to not undo it, but weed through all of this stuff where he hasn't been told anything except, hey, leave her alone.
Right. So if you look
Gosh.
at it from Dave's perspective, I've been doing this for years. You
Yeah.
pay me, you give me raises, and this is what I do. Why is it
Mhm.
wrong all of a sudden? But Dave didn't have any clue that what he was doing was wrong. And it took me hours to get out of him, do you show up at her kids' sporting things? No. On Saturday mornings at this school, at this time, for this event, are you in the stands seated behind her? Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
Every single point that I had to ask him, he made me go through a long checklist. And once everything went off, it was okay. I
Right.
said, do you have romantic feelings for her? He said, no.
Mm.
I said, do you want to be in a relationship with her? Oh, no. Do you plan to ask her out? No. What is it?
Hmm.
I just like being around her. I said, Dave, are you now or have you ever been in a romantic relationship? Oh, no. He couldn't get himself to cross the double line in the middle of the road. He could bring himself right up to it, but he couldn't get himself to cross it
Yeah.
his whole life. He admitted these things to me like it was nothing. And I sat there and I took it all in. I went back and I told the team from the company, this guy's an obsessed stalker. I'm going to call consultants and get a real good psychological profile of him so we know what to do in this matter. And we did. He was let go for 2 weeks to go to EAP. The company said, because we as a company have failed and have not put him on an action plan, we have not put him on a warning.
No
2
shit.
years ago. Right, 2 years, then we have to keep him. So
Mhm.
they told me, we're going to put him in a different workplace. And when he comes back from EAP, he's going to report to that. He came back in. I met with him, with his boss and HR. This is your new place to work. She works in the other building. You're not to call her, text her, go over there, email her, look at her, see her, think about her. You're supposed to work in your new building. On Monday morning at 8 o'clock, you'll be expected. This is your new boss. Okay. So I talked to the legal team and the HR team. They said, that should take care of it. I'm certain by now the problem's over. I said, I'm no expert, but I got to tell you, he's an obsessed.
Yeah. I'll
stalker.
believe it when I see it.
Right. So I told my team, with Mary's approval, would you mind if we set up a small covert camera in your workplace, just in case he comes around? Now, he was banned from that building and his access was cut off. But I said, obsessed stalkers, they don't worry about stuff like that. They find workarounds. So 8 o'clock in the morning comes, he shows up at his new workplace. But as that's happening, I'm getting a call from my head of security, physical security in the building. He calls me and says, Dan, you're going to want to come in and see this. At 7 o'clock, he went over to the old building where she works with a book, a box of books, holding it so somebody had to open the door for him. Everybody knew who he was. He worked there for years. What'd they do? They held the door for him.
Yeah.
He walks right in, goes over to her cubicle, sets the books down, and begins doing this. Breathing in the air in her cube.
Oh, so you're watching video of this?
Right.
Oof.
He sits down in her chair, is touching the arms, touching the desk, touching everything, taking souvenirs. He's just taking in the experience for about 20-something minutes until people come into the building and he gets up and goes out. Reports to his new workplace. we called him in. I called HR and I called legal and said, do you need to see the video? Because if you want to, you can take my word for it. He went over there. Okay, fine. So we brought him in and fired him. And now I have to watch for him all the time to see if he's going to come back because he's obsessed. But that was really, I had never interviewed anyone who was that difficult to get information out of, and whose motives remained so unclear to me. He didn't seem to have a romantic interest in her.
So when they then like send him to EAP for a little bit, are they able to get feedback at all, or is that total confidentiality? Or like, was there a psych assessment or anything?
I'm sure there was. He went every day for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding, the only thing HR was able to share with me was he was cleared to return to work. That's it.
Yeah.
And there is confidentiality. You have to understand and respect that.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah. I mean, even, in my job, when someone gets directed, I can really only say, like, do I have any restrictions for this person at work? I can't give any diagnoses or anything. But it's interesting because one of our listeners, Emily, she was saying, like, this looks like autism to me in a sense. She has a child with autism and is very, very involved. And I'm sure, I mean, somewhere on the spectrum, he could have absolutely been there. And, you can also have this obsessive stalker trait to you as well. It's just, it would be fascinating to know really what was found there throughout the
There's so
piece.
much interesting stuff from your story too. I'm sorry, Dr. Shell, I didn't mean to speak over you.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
That one of the things that can happen with people on the spectrum and for other diagnoses too is this thing about auditory processing, that if you don't ask the question in the way that they actually think about it, then it doesn't make sense to say yes. It's like, no. So it's up to you or the person who's questioning or interviewing to find the right particular thing that has meaning to that person.
Yeah.
But that also, like Dr. Shelley was saying, is that's only one part of the picture too. And I'm always really suspect of an EAP being able to handle something like that. And also to kind of get like, so here's something that's been going on for 2 years and they think, okay, well, it's 2 weeks. We fixed it. Let's put them back.
They had to go through their check boxes. Yeah. Right. Wow. That's just
was there monitoring set up for like following this over the years or?
Not really. The only thing I told my team was we had to be on alert that he would come back to one of our buildings and try to gain entry. I asked Mary and any of the coworkers in the team to let me know immediately if he reached out to her or anyone else. I asked Mary to block his numbers. I mean, we did the basics that we could on our end. But frankly, I never heard or saw from him again.
Yeah, I'm sure he fixated on somebody else. Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Dan. That has so much crossover. Even our last guest from last month is a psychologist that does workplace violence risk assessment and dovetailed really nicely into this huge umbrella of risk and threat assessment and threat management. And Tom, yours is another offshoot under that umbrella, which, gosh, I mean, I know you've told me a little bit about the story and it was pretty impactful already, but please, we'd love to hear about your case.
Well, this was actually out of my career, one of the most satisfying cases that I did. And there's a number of reasons why. In 2018, there was an individual, we'll call him Brian, because I don't want to give him any notoriety.
Right.
Brian decided one night to get in a chat room with a number of other people, about 4 or 5 other people. And Brian started throwing out what ifs on in the chat room. What if someone happened to shoot up a school? What if someone left a note in the bathroom that there was going to be a shooting? And he kind of went on and on with that. One brave girl decided out of the group that this wasn't good and decided to take screenshots of everything that was being said. So she took that and went to the local PD. Now, at the time, I was working still in the Joint Terrorism Task Force, but I was working at a satellite office in upstate New York, which happened to be close to my home, close to, my neighborhood school where all this was going on. And the local detectives in the town decided, all right, this might be a lot. Let me go knock on the door of the FBI office, which is nearby.
Sure.
I actually had just left that day to go home. My partner was still at work. One of the detectives came in, met with Mel, went over what was going on and what he had. She immediately texted me like, hey, this just walked in. Now, Mel knows my kids, two of my kids still go to that school.
Oh, so this was a targeted school that had
Oh,
been
yeah.
named.
Yep.
Okay.
So
Gosh.
she
Wow.
sends me a picture of the guy we're talking about. I immediately go get it checked out, find out who he is, what his deal is. And we start the case. We start going right into him. Now, Mel was a very savvy IT social media person. So she had multiple covert accounts set up. So she immediately got into his accounts, friend, all that, which he accepted, not knowing who she was. So now that gives us the whole back and forth with everything that he's putting out there. We get BAU in the FBI involved right away. The school is involved right away. This becomes a just massive thing that we're undertaking because of the threats. What's going on in schools. We got to get this. We got to get ahead of this real quick. So now we start seeing all multiple posts going on with him, pictures of shotguns, pictures of drawings he's done about shootings. All this stuff starts being circulated on social media, which we are now watching.
So within hours, it's escalating to more and more behavior.
It's
days.
Each day.
Okay.
We then figure out that there's an account under one of the Columbine shooters' names, Harris. That's his account. His two biggest heroes in the world were the Columbine shooters. That's who he wanted to be. He idolized Nicholas Cruz from the Florida shooting. So he has this obsession with school shooters. Now that brings us up to even a more immediate thing. We start doing a little background check of him on top of the surveillances that we're trying to do on him and talking to some people in the school about him. One of the things that keeps coming up is he kept having conversations with people about the last day of school. He would ask them, when's the last day of school? When's the last day of classes? When's this? And it just kept adding up to him asking multiple people that. So now in our minds, we have our target date. He's looking at the last day of school, which at that point was only about 6 or 7 days away.
Can I ask, I think this would be helpful to our audience in the team that you're working with and all the surveillance and monitoring and intel gathering that you guys are doing. What was the investigative line of thinking of, instead of going and scooping him up at this point, gathering more intel, right? And all of that.
Just getting more evidence to get him, to
build a case.
We didn't want to tip him off and do an interview. We wanted to get as much as we could on him to make one big scoop and get him. That was our plan. The surveillance was to a point. He didn't do a lot of moving around. He stayed home a lot, which made it easy, but he was very active on social media, which made it easier for us. So we just kept track of that.
And was he a current student or former student or?
Yep.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Currently in the school.
Okay, got it.
And are you able to run a weapons background check?
Oh, we did everything. You name it. We did everything on the
plan. Did he have purchases or was he just pulling pictures off the web?
We got the search warrants to look at his internet action, and he was looking up guns, looking up how to purchase them, where to purchase them.
Got it.
We were able to pinpoint. He was watching an interview of a school shooter who was caught. I'm going to forget where exactly it was, but that shooter during an interview on the news mentions a website. He stopped the interview, went right to that website.
Great.
That shooter purchased his gun on.
Wow.
So now we know what he's looking into. We had a video surveillance from a local Dick's Sporting Goods that he was in there at the weapons, looking for the way he stated it, what shotgun shell will do the most damage to a human being. He actually asked the salesperson that.
Lovely.
We have all this info that is going good. It's going in the right direction that we want it. We have the target date, we have the subject, we have the location. Now we get word that he is actually away in Delaware at a basketball tournament. Okay, which is okay. That gives us enough time to do what we need to do. But while he's down there, he sets a post out, I need a gun. That was his post. So now we said, okay, that's it. Now we got him. We get together with the local guys, the state police, the district attorney's office, and actually, sadly, had to convince and talk the DA into giving us a search warrant for the house. We actually had to do that. He didn't immediately, yep, no problem, let's get him. We actually had to have a full conversation with the DA to get a search warrant, which he finally agreed to. So we have this plan of going to the house and being at the house while he's on his way home from Delaware. We have the state police on board that are on the highways waiting for his car to pass to follow him home. We're already in the house. The father's in the house. We have him secure in an area, but now he gets home. His mother is actually driving him home from the tournament. So as he pulls into
Is
the
she
drive,
aware?
we were pretty convinced later on that she might have had an idea of what was going on and the troubles he had.
Okay. But she wasn't aware that you guys were at the location.
Nobody knew. We came in real quiet, no big fanfare, got into the house, made sure dad was secure. We actually had him call his wife to see where they were exactly. Hey, where are you on the highway? Oh, we're here. So the state police had a good idea of where they were at. So as they pull into the driveway, we're already outside. We pull him out of the car. We arrest him right there. And now we have him secure in the back of a car and he's sitting there and we start our search inside the house. We leave him outside. He's being watched and guarded. We start searching the house. We find multiple research packets of every conceivable serial killer you can think of. I mean, not like 2 or 3 pages, stacks of different references that he was using with serial killers. So we have that. We find a little shrine thing for the Columbine shooters. And now the biggest part of this, in his room, we find the diagram that he drew of the classroom that this was going to take place in. The desks that he drew had red circles around them. And on the back of that paper was the hit list, the 5 individuals he was going to kill. And I knew every one of them personally. They were actually best friends.
Tom, how did you send your kids to school during all of this? Or did you? Maybe you didn't.
We did because, you know, he wasn't going to school every day. He was kind of in and out of school, you know, and we had him locked down. If he went towards the school, we were going to kill him. That was the reason for the surveillances on him.
Got it.
So we were okay with him, you know, with them going to school, but now we have the evidence, we have it all. And I actually go outside and I open the back of the car where he's sitting. And one of the things that I did through my career of talking and interviewing or interrogating individuals, I always had this thing about talking about sports first to calm people down. That was just my thing. It was just something I picked out, is a common thing amongst people sometimes. So I went up to him and I started asking him about the basketball tournament he was just at. How many points did you score? Who do you win? You know, and I saw his level of, you know, anxiety come down quite a bit. And then he says, well, you want to know how I was going to do it? And sure, why not? So he lays out this whole thing of how it was going to take place in the classroom, getting the girls out of the classroom, lining them against the wall. It was really graphic in what he explained. And I just went, okay, thanks. And then he goes, oh yeah, by the way, there's a pipe bomb under my bed. Okay. So now we have to run and clear everyone out of the room, get everyone out of the house in immediate fashion. Bomb squad comes in, flips the bed over, finds the components to it. It wasn't put together, but what was there, you know, could have possibly been made into a pipe bomb later on. And now the weird part of the story, we actually ended up arresting him 3 times. We locked him up for this initially. He got out on bail. A few weeks later, put another threat on the internet. This time with gasoline canisters that, oh, I'll just use these instead. So we locked him up again. Now, this time, the search warrant was for the garage. In the garage, we find books of the Boston Marathon bombing and other events that took place with tabs in it on how to pull it off, how to plan it, how to escape, all this other. So we arrested him again. He gets out again. And on, I believe it was New Year's Eve, he puts another threat out. This time we locked him up federally, and he ended up doing 5 years in federal prison for multiple threats to the school.
So I'm guessing he was 18 by the time the first arrest, right? He was an adult already.
Yes.
Was there any through, you know, all the way up until his federal time, any mental health intervention that got either, you know,
A little bit, not the way it should have been by any stretch. You know, we had, he would see school counselors and things like that. He was on a small medication, which he didn't take. He didn't like it.
Yeah.
But that was a scary case because of being so personal to it. You know, I had to juggle just being a cop, being a detective, stopping a school shooting from happening, on top of it being my town, being friends with the principal, knowing every kid in that school. You know, so I had to keep it in check of just do your job, just get it done right. You know, it'll work out, we'll get them. You know, and then have especially 2 of my kids in that school in the back of my mind also.
Oh my gosh.
Find lists and knowing every kid personally, which now the next day we have to go notify them of this.
Right.
You know, so that, you know, and I was, you know, my kids' friends know obviously what I did. So I had my daughter call one of them and say, hey, tell him to come home. I need to, why does her dad need to talk to me? Because they didn't know.
Yeah.
So that broke the ice a little bit because we kind of joked around a little bit about it, but it was scary. You know, it was a scary time in this town, you know, that they were 5 days away from being known all over the world for a horrible event, you know, in a small town. And thankfully, again, to one brave person who knew enough that it wasn't right, what was being said wasn't right, and took the action of, and we call her a hero every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so much leakage there. I mean, the leakage is unbelievable, almost
That's
over
great.
the top.
That was something we learned through working with BAU, was the leaking part.
Right.
And there was once we learned what that was, there was so much of that. I mean, he had such an inability to keep it inside him. He was so excited about maybe pulling this off that he would talk about it and throw little, you know, crumbs out there. And luckily we were able to get them all.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, but all of that can happen, and it never progresses. Well, not all of that. So much of that can happen, and it doesn't progress anywhere near what you had to encounter. I mean, as you're telling your story, like I could feel, you know, like I'm just hitting our checklist at our job of like, oh, there was a couple of times I was going, well, yeah, but you know, he's poking, he wants attention. And then there's one more thing and one more thing and one more thing. And that's when, you know, it seems like you guys, the stars were aligned in everybody's favor to save lives, and your hard work of like just persevering. But again, that's why we educate people too. We try and educate parents, like teach your kids it's not about being snitches. It's about being responsible friends and responsible peers. If someone does that, use your phone, take a screenshot, grab it. You've got to grab it.
And you know what? I just spoke actually a few days ago in a college, and one of the things I say all the time to college kids is, you know, police departments don't have and will never have the access that kids have to the general public, to society. There's no cop that has a kid's access. So they're the eyes and ears of what's going on out there. And the one thing I stress to them is you don't want to be that person who has a thought that something's wrong and not say something.
Right.
And have a tragic event happen that now you're going to own. You're going to have to live with that. And I implore them, and like you just said, Scott, it's not a snitch. It's just information. That's kind of how I put it to them. All you're giving us is information. And I hope you're wrong. I tell them that all the time. Hope you're wrong. But if you're right, you're going to save someone's life or multiple lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for the work that you did, but also for sharing that story, because these stories unfortunately happen every single day where these situations are thwarted because the system is working the way it's supposed to. And because of heroes like this young lady, I was at a retirement ceremony yesterday for our local FBI BAU coordinator, and one of the chiefs of police of one of the universities was there speaking, and he said, all of us chiefs of police for these schools know of the dozens and dozens of incidents that we've thwarted, in conjunction with, working with this FBI and BAU coordinator in the threat assessment arena. So yes, it's scary to think that it happens every day, but it does. And maybe it wouldn't have been something, but no one's waiting around to find out if it's going to be.
So Shiloh and Scott as well, I know that you like movie references.
Here we go.
Indeed.
One immediately comes to mind. Now, this is my wife's favorite film of all time, The Breakfast Club. Oh. And in Shermer High School, the custodian, Carl, at one point tells the kids that he is the eyes and ears of this institution. I go through your lockers. I see your stuff. I know what's going on around here. And in a joking way, I guess, we all need to be a Carl in certain ways. We all need to pay attention to our surroundings and what the people around us are doing, and not be afraid to use that information when it crosses over the line into risk and threat and danger. And so in this case, what that kid did at that high school, Tom, was absolutely remarkable for a young person. It's remarkable for an adult nowadays in a world where people don't want to get involved.
Oh yeah.
But for a kid to do it, it's fantastic.
And it's a different world. It's just a different world. Even I love The Breakfast Club. It's so great on so many levels, problematic on some other levels, but but it's so, you look at that and you think, what a much simpler life that when kids were not, there's being a teenager sucks, but not being bombarded with information all the time, which is contributes to these kids kind of retreating into their own worlds of violent fantasies. So we just got some discussion here on the YouTube channel that Emily was sharing, that she reinforces this to her kids, that that you have to be responsible, and you got to take screenshots when somebody does that, even if it's just being provocative, because that actually can be a learning lesson for a kid of no, you don't get to be provocative. That has consequences.
Right. And one of the things that, I'll say all the time, what you don't think, meaning a teenage kid in high school, what you don't think is important may be mind blowing once you send it to a detective or a police officer or a teacher. What you think might be a simple line on a text or whatever may mean something else because of different information that has been building up, leading to this. You never know, and you better safe than sorry. It's an old term. We've used it for our whole lives, but it's so true. And I tell the kids, get it to the hands of the professionals. Let the cops do their job. Let the administration do their job. Get it off of your plate. You did the right thing. That's it. That you don't have to live with a mistake that may happen later on.
And one of the things that I've always made sure I've told people in my corporate roles and even as a consultant is, when it comes to this sort of stuff, when it comes to reporting concerns about someone, you can be wrong. And an organization has to build that into their culture. They have to build it into their security processes, their threat assessment, it has to be that you can report real valid concerns, whether you're right or wrong, without repercussions.
Yeah.
That is so important, because if people feel that they're going to get in trouble for reporting, and I even saw this Tom and I have seen this as a cop. How many times, I'm sure you've seen this too, Shiloh, people tell you, well, I didn't want to call 911. I didn't want to get in trouble, or I didn't want to bother you. I didn't, all that kind of stuff. We need people to know that it's the reason why professionals exist, is to get these pieces of information, to act on them. And if you're wrong, you meant well.
Absolutely.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And there are people we forget, because of this world that all four of us reside in, that we forget that also, people can be very kind, and they can be very compassionate, and they can take a stance where they're like, oh, I didn't want to say anything because maybe she's having a hard time, maybe he's going through something, which is all very well and good. But again, let a professional decide whether or not that's something that's going to escalate. You guys, having you on today has been so great, and I'm hoping that we can coerce you to come back on a show in the future, maybe as a crossover with we can all four of us offer our perspectives on a case or something. But I did want to wrap this up by getting a couple of words from you guys. Where do you see your show going, and what would you really like to see come of the work that you're putting into Gold Shields? What do you think?
Tom, kick it off.
Okay. You know what? It's our goal was always in the beginning of this to bring attention to hard work, that everyone does, detectives and agents in the military. And we just want to continue that growing, so more and more people understand that the amount of dedicated people that are out there is mind blowing. I mean, even for Dan and I, we'll hear or have someone on the show that is going to tell a story that we'll know the background of it, obviously. But then as they start to explain it, Dan and I just sit there and become a fan, not knowing a lot of the stuff that went into a particular case that we thought we knew about, and we just want that out there, and the acknowledgement that, there's 1%, that less than 1% of cops might not be doing the right thing, and 99.999 are. You always hear about the 1% on the news because that's what drives, and it has to be known that there's so many dedicated men and women out there and that's our goal. That's our goal. Dan and I have said it all the time, that if we can get a handful of people to acknowledge that, then we're doing the right thing, and thankfully it's going more and more.
And then there's a second piece to that, Tom, and it bleeds over into it. And this is an unintended consequence of us starting the show. We didn't really even think about this necessarily, was how important it is that the word get out there that, number one, members of law enforcement, military are human, and the traumas and experiences we have do stay with you and can affect you, and that it is beyond the smart and right thing to do to get help for that. We want to help break the stigma associated with seeking help for things like post-traumatic stress, for traumas that you've seen in your life and your career. We want to help break that stigma and let people know you are strong if you step up and say, I need help. You are not weak. You're somebody who wants to take care of an element of your existence that is beyond your control sometimes, but is vitally important to you having a good, fruitful, happy life and being there for your family and friends. We really want to stress that, which is why we're very happy to be part of it. Happy to be involved with you two professionals in that area, because we know you both passionately believe in that as well. So that's I think the second piece of what drives us. We want to see that happen.
Wonderful. Upcoming any guests that you got scheduled coming up?
Yeah, we just recorded a great show. I mean, a show we've been looking for so long, that'll be out this week with Richard Jones, who is one of the leading experts in the world on Jack the Ripper. He was unbelievable. I mean, Dan and I just sat there with our mouths open, like, to have someone as knowledgeable as him telling that story and what was able to bring to the show of just detail after detail of the show was unbelievable.
Yeah, and I
You
don't
know,
think
we-
anybody should. I don't think anybody should be allowed to tell the Jack the Ripper story unless they're actually British and they have a thick accent.
Heck yes, of
Because he
course.
does, and it just sounds so much better, right?
Oh my gosh, can't wait for that. Well, thank you guys for the show. Thank you for the platform you put out there, because people wouldn't talk about their struggles if you didn't make it a safe, supportive place to do that. And just the fact that you've been there, you've walked in those shoes, certainly leads them to talk about those important things. Thank you both for your service as well. And we can't wait to see what happens with Gold Shields. So we appreciate your time so much tonight, guys.
Thank you so much for having us. Great. Thank you.
Of
Yeah,
course.
this was great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. We'll see you next time on Behind the Couch, and good night. Have a great weekend.
Take
Stay
care.
safe, folks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.